Hello and welcome to EURACTIV's Agrifood Podcast. I'm Julia Dam.
I'm Gerardo Fortuna.
And I'm Natasha Foote.
And here's your weekly update on all things agriculture and food in the EU from EURACTIV's Agrifood news team.
This week, the fertilisers communication, CAP derogation failures, and all you need to know on the Dutch farmers' protests. So hello and welcome back to another episode of the EURACTIV Agrifood Brief podcast.
Hello.
Hello. That was a very formal introduction today. Don't know.
Yeah, you're so
Good day.
Podcast.
I know. It's the full name. It's like when your parents full name you, like you've been in trouble.
Yeah.
And this week we're going to kick off the podcast talking about this big hoo-ha this week over a fertilisers communication, which doesn't sound very necessarily interesting, but it is, because of course the sector, the fertilisers, everything this year with fertilisers has been problems on all ends, because there's been issues of supply with the sanctions to Belarus. There's been issues of prices, mainly pushed by the energy prices, which fertilizer sector is intimately linked with. And so there's been a real crisis this year of fertilizers. And many stakeholders have been calling for an EU-wide fertilizers strategy. Now, did we get that this week, Gerardo?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually the issue, because
it's the crux of the issue here, yeah.
We spoke to...
Classic, it's complicated.
Yeah.
No, we spoke to a lot of stakeholders immediately after the announcement of this communication.
Which was where?
In Strasbourg. Mm-hmm. It's like a quiz.
No, I'm just giving the context.
Okay.
It was
on Thursday. It was last Thursday. Okay. Out of the joke. The issue is that most of them, of the stakeholders that we contacted to do our coverage, got another thing, that there's going to be a strategy.
Which meant everyone was very excited. Yes, the Agriculture Commissioner, Janusz Wojciechowski, is committed to a fertilizer strategy. They're welcoming it, having a party.
What does strategy mean apart from the party? Strategy means actions, but also money.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there's nothing like that.
At least not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Because we contacted the Commission, and the Commission were quite firm in specifying that it's not going to be a strategy. It's going to be a communication on the current situation of fertilizer, addressing the issue, for instance, on how to make the EU fertilizer industry less externally dependent from third countries. Russia, basically, but also from the volatility of the markets, as well as how to make EU farmers less dependent on fertilizer, which is one of the main scope of the Farm to Fork strategy. But doesn't mean that this will imply some material actions.
It was such a lesson in EU jargon for me, because I was getting confused looking at this. Is it a strategy? Is it communication? The way I boiled it down was that a strategy is a communication, but a communication is not a strategy. And there's a lesson in some beautiful Brussels jargon for you.
Almost philosophical, I'd say. To be fair, there's also another interesting aspect that was mentioned by Wojciechowski in his speech before the MEPs, when he said that the communication will also offer a chance to assess whether proper attention has been paid to the uptake of precision farming, proper rational planning of fertilizer use, and incentivizing the biological alternatives in the Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plan. So it's already a reassessment of the CAP. Some of them are not yet approved.
Yeah, we haven't even got them all approved yet, and we're already talking about how they're going to improve them for the yearly review. They have this annual review of these CAP strategic plans, and he's already saying what we'll put into the next one.
Yeah, you remember last week we were speaking about we were talking about the fact that we're already discussing the next program of the Common Agricultural Policy from 2027.
Oh my God.
So now
I don't think I can cope with it just yet, to be honest.
Now we're discussing how to recalibrate the national strategic plans that are not yet approved. This is...
I mean, to be honest, it also seems a bit like member states are turning to the EU to help solve this issue, and Wojciechowski is going back and saying, well, let's look at what you guys are doing to the member states.
Today is a lesson on EU policy making. It's really the fertilizer, when you analyze the situation through the lens, in this case, the lens of fertilizer and communication, not strategy, communication, not strategy. But there were also other interesting things that happened this week.
One of which Yulia reported on.
Yeah.
Yulia, what were you reporting on? Tell us a little bit.
So some of you might have heard it before. We've also reported before in this regular agricultural outlook, that the short-term agricultural outlook that the Commission publishes every few months. And this outlook usually looks quite boring from the outside. It's full of numbers, statistics, looks a bit technical. But actually, once you dive in, there's usually something juicy and something meaty in there. And this time, indeed, there was. Because this outlook actually revealed that the relaxation of green measures that some of you might remember this year, the Commission allowed member states to relax some of the green measures inside the cap in order to deal with the impact of the Ukraine war. So it reveals that this relaxation of green measures actually hasn't had any impact on the production of grain, which was supposed to be the whole point of them.
Da, da, da.
Surprise.
That's quite a conclusion there, because these derogations that you were mentioning were so controversial at the time. I mean, so many NGOs and green campaign groups were lambasting this decision, and
even within the Commission, because
even within the Commission,
know that
absolutely.
One commissioner that we will not mention, I'm joking, the Vice President of the Commission, Franz Timmermans, was quite against this provision. And in the end it was approved in July, if I remember correctly.
And the fact that it now amounted to nothing, essentially, because it hasn't helped increase the yields, but it has decreased the environmental,
it's
measures.
It's both production, but also the area covered by cereal crops.
Yeah, indeed. So the most direct effect that it could have, because the measures were basically supposed to allow farmers to use more land to grow grain, wheat on it instead of using it for environmental purposes. But the area and the production for cereals actually decreased instead of increasing. So even in the most direct way, there was no effect. And this is not just me saying it, making the connection, is the Commission itself who says in the report, despite the derogations, there was this decrease. So it's quite revealing.
It's not our interpretation; it's the
Commission's report. This is word for word. I mean, it's interesting. Perhaps there should have been some kind of, dare I say it, impact assessment
Dun, dun, dun.
about these derogations before they were implemented. Isn't everyone always want an impact assessment for everything?
For everything, yeah.
So where was the impact assessment? Controversial.
No, but also
I think it's a valid question.
No, it's a super valid question.
If you're going to do something, if you're going to make a change like this, you have to back it up. Like, what's the impact it's actually going to have?
Which is also the main argument of from the Timmermans side, because Timmermans was basically saying we don't know if this allowing this derogation will actually have an impact on the production and conversely on fixing the supply issue at the global level, because I mean this is supposed to fill the gap created by the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Of course, we know that Ukraine is one of the major foodstuff producers: maize, grain, oil, sunflower oil, sunflower seeds oil. So it also makes us thinking whether the action of the EU in providing food security at the global level is actually efficient.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is today
opening some big questions today.
I mean, just to throw in a balancing point in this outlook, actually, well, the Commission titled this outlook or presented it as the EU continues to play its part to contributing to global food security. And the argument they make for this is that exports are actually set to grow, grain exports, despite the decreasing yields. And this is because there were actually some stocks left from before, and the ending stocks, they're called, that can still be exported. So exports are actually still expected to increase, and therefore the Commission says that the EU actually is contributing to global food security. It's just that the derogations didn't help in doing that.
I guess the stocks will only last so long though, won't they?
The bright side, the full half glass.
Yeah. No, anyway, it's a very interesting article, and so I invite you all to check it out on EURACTIV. So this week, we've decided to do a deep dive into the farmers' protests that have been going on in the Netherlands. They've been ongoing for months. So what is going on?
So in the Netherlands, the current situation is quite unclear. So there's a lot of unrest among farmers because there's insecurity about the national nitrogen policy.
So that's Iris Bouwers. She's a Dutch farmer who's previously also been involved in EU policy work.
The highest judge in the Netherlands actually ruled a few years ago already that our Natura 2000 areas are not well protected, not protected enough, I must say. And specifically also pointing at the agricultural sector to be a big source of the nitrogen deposition that is going on. So the nature quality seems not to be good enough, and farmers feel blamed for it.
Iris explained that many Dutch farmers feel attacked by the plans.
They do have an impact on the nature quality, but they also feel, attacked, I must say, because the government and also some NGOs are mostly looking at farmers, while obviously there are many businesses having a major impact on Natura 2000 areas. And I must say the government has not presented clear perspective. So offering some solutions, but not the perspective for farmers who actually would like to continue farming.
For Iris, the current proposals on the table give no hope to the next generation of farmers.
There have been quite some proposals to buy out farmers that are maybe older or not interested in pursuing their farming activities, but no perspective really has been found or offered to those young people who would like to start farming, or farmers that are just very innovative and would like to continue their farm. So farmers feel very much unheard, and they're worried because the government is not offering the clear solutions.
Asked about the farmers' response, Ariel Brunner, who is the Deputy Director for BirdLife in the European Central Asia region, had this to say.
We have agricultural policies that are locking farmers into ecologically disastrous practices, and those practices will need to stop simply because the crisis, the ecological and climate crisis, is becoming bigger and bigger.
For Ariel, the problem has arisen from years of what he calls a dereliction of duty by national governments in the EU.
The major source of nitrogen emissions is farming in the Netherlands and overall in Europe. Now, of course, we have other sources of pollution, and we need to tackle all the sources of pollution, but the problem doesn't go away simply by pointing to other sectors.
But what about the speed of change? Has the Dutch government been too hasty here? Well, Ariel certainly doesn't think so.
Well, the time for doing it was, decades ago when we've adopted the Habitats Directive and the Nitrates Directive. We have wasted 20 years where we could have helped farmers change. And the window of opportunity is closing, and the change will become more and more painful the longer we wait.
Likewise, for Jeroen Candel, who is an associate professor of food and agricultural policy at the Netherlands Wageningen University, the Dutch government has let farmers down by dragging its feet over the years.
There have been these long warnings, but government has always, I think, favored short-term economic interest in the agricultural sector over these longer-term environmental concerns, and basically been telling farmers, well, you can continue expanding your stables, you can continue to innovate. This will be enough to deal with these environmental pressures. You don't need to take any measures at the source, and well, very understandably, farmers are very, very upset about the draconic measures that now need to be taken in order to comply with this court decision, and as well as with EU legislation.
So this week, a specially appointed mediator, Johan Remkes, came forward with his advice for the situation. So what did he have to say?
He had a very, you could say, shopping list of advices, but I think the main thing is that he advised to forcibly buy out farmers, and then especially the biggest emitters close to Natura 2000 areas within a year. And he also blamed the government for its poor communication over the last year. So he said, well, you've basically allowed farmers to expand for years, and now suddenly you need to take very drastic measures, and it's very understandable that farmers are very upset about that.
In practice, this would see the government buying out around 500 to 600 of the largest emitters around the Natura areas, a move which farmers have lambasted as an attack on their way of life. Also interestingly, for Jeroen, the experience in the Netherlands has wider implications for the future of the Green Deal and how its ambitions play out in the EU.
I think this whole nitrogen crisis is only a start of a much longer and deeper transition process that we've only very recently started discussing. I think it will be interesting to see how this nitrogen crisis will be followed up. And in that sense, I think the Netherlands is also a very interesting experimentation ground for these big questions about, okay, how can we really make sure that agriculture, the food system, will be aligned with these environmental objectives in the future. So to overcome this current dichotomy between the two.
As well as this new advice, the Netherlands also had another development this week with the appointment of a new agricultural minister. But he has a tough job ahead of him.
Well, I definitely don't envy him. I mean, it's a very difficult position to be in. There's a new minister from the same party who doesn't have a background in agriculture. He's not very well known. And he won't have any time to get used to the job, because now immediately he will have to implement these advices that came out this week. And in the meantime, some farmer groups already announced that they disagree with these advices, that will continue their protest. It's still very sensitive within the coalition. So this is really one of the main cleavages between the coalition parties. So it's definitely a very difficult political landscape to operate in.
So what would Iris, the young Dutch farmer we heard at the beginning of this segment, have to say to the minister if she had the chance?
I personally really hope that the minister will take into account the specific needs of young farmers, not just because I am one of them, but mainly because those are the people who have to provide us with food in future. Those people who are struggling the most, I would say, at this point, who will handle all the ambitions also when it comes to climate, animal welfare, water, soil, health. So, I really hope the minister opens his eyes and ears and really will speak and visit young farmers to see where, the best direction is to go.
So that's all from us this week. And this week, the EURACTIV Agrifood Podcast was produced by EURACTIV's Agrifood team. That's Gerardo Fortuna, Julia Dam and Natasha Foote, with the technical support of Malte Ketterson.
This podcast is also available on all major streaming platforms, including Apple, Amazon, Spotify and Stitcher.
And be sure to subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss the latest agricultural news from the EU. I'm Gerardo Fortuna. Thanks for listening and see you next week.